Gordon, great to see you again.
Thank you so much.
Yes. So I wanted to get right to the point. What do you think the current state is between United States and China? I believe President Trump was taking on China very actively. Probably he's the first prominent politician, and he wasn't even a politician when he complained about China, that they're ripping us off, they're taking our lunch, about the trade deficit and all those issues. And now Trump lost, and now we have Biden administration. Should we be worried about it?
Well, we need to be worried for a number of reasons. First of all, the Chinese don't respect Biden. And they talk about Hunter Biden in the sense that he'll be able to move the American government in ways that China likes and that we don't like. So we got to be concerned about their state of mind. The other thing, though, about Biden himself, we know that he has views which are really outdated about China. He's sort of a benign, rosy view. And we learned that on the CNN town hall when Anderson Cooper asked him about whether Biden had raised human rights with Xi Jinping on that 2-hour phone call. And Biden then launched into this long explanation of China's atrocities and human rights abuses and crimes against humanity. And that was one of the most disgraceful things I've heard from an American president, probably the most disgraceful. This whole notion that crimes against humanity are the result of Chinese cultural norms is just absurd. I mean, they're the result of Communist Party policies. But also we know that the Biden administration is doing this top-to-bottom review of China policies. And in the interim, though, they're taking some actions which are really disturbing. So, for instance, on Biden's first day in office, January 20, he issued an executive order that repealed President Trump's May 1st, 2020 executive order. President Trump had prevented utilities and grid operators from purchasing equipment from China. In other words, protecting our grid from sabotage Chinese equipment. President Biden, in his executive order, repealed that. I mean, that's indefensible. I can understand why Biden wants to review Trump policy. That's his prerogative. But he should have left Americans protected while he's conducting that review. Instead, we are vulnerable in the interim.
That executive order that Biden repealed, how come that's not getting enough coverage on New York Times, Washington Post, and CNN, et cetera?
You got to ask them, because I think this is really important. It's also one of a series of actions the Biden administration has taken to repeal Trump-era protections of the American public. So I just find this to be inexplicable, but you'd have to ask those publications why they're not covering this.
So we heard many negative news coming from China, including Eric Swalwell. I bet you are familiar with that news. And also Dianne Feinstein. That's also not getting a lot of coverage about one of her deputies being a spy for China, pretty much. Do you think the American government is pretty much infiltrated by China? I get a feeling that China is even taking over the United States. Not just that, I'll get into big tech a little bit, but just in that aspect, government-wise, do you think a lot of them are pretty much compromised?
I think so. And the reason is we know that China has worked very hard to influence American politicians. Remember, China's Ministry of State Security got first contact with Swalwell, not while he was sitting on the House Intelligence Committee, where of course he'd be very valuable for China. They first got in contact with him when he was a council member in Dublin City, California. That means they're grooming hundreds, maybe even thousands of American politicians that they think are promising, that maybe someday they'll be valuable to them. So, yes, we've got to be extremely concerned that the penetration is much farther and much more broad than we thought.
So I'm asking myself, what is the intelligence community doing? Isn't their job to tip these situations, to them in advance so that they don't get compromised like this? I mean, Eric Swalwell, I heard that he might be the head of the intelligence committee in the House, right?
I don't know where that will go, but he's certainly sitting on the Intelligence Committee. He wasn't removed.
He should be kicked out, right?
Well, he should be kicked out. He should be kicked out for one reason. having the Ministry of State Security contact you, that's not, to me, grounds. I mean, if that were the grounds, then every congressman would be kicked out of Congress.
Sure.
But the problem is Swalwell was not forthcoming with the American public about all of this. Remember that China's Fang
is a spy, Chinese spy.
The Chinese spy that we think...
she was a college student here, right?
She was a college student here. She's still in contact with the Swalwell family. Swalwell is not answering questions about his relationship with her, and until he is, we have to assume that he's been compromised. So, if he were to come out and say, "Look, yeah, I had sex with her," so what? That means it's not a sensitive matter for him. But the fact he's not saying anything about it means that there's something there that we don't know, and that's what makes me so concerned. And for me, it means he should not be sitting on the House Intel Committee.
And what's mind-boggling for me is he was one of the proponents about the Russia collusion hoax, Trump-Russia collusion hoax, and he criticized Trump on a daily, 24/7, pretty much, that he's a spy for the Russians. He's a puppet for Putin. I mean, where is the outrage on the other side? It seems like we're always playing defense. I'm saying we because I can't be aligned. I'm a journalist, but I don't want to be aligned into this kind of lie. It's complete lie. How come there's no outrage about, a blowback to them?
This is the other thing about Swalwell. He was contacted about 2015 by the FBI and informed that Fang might be a Ministry of State Security agent. He sits on the House Intel Committee. He knows that the greatest threat to the American Republic by far is posed by China, not Russia. But as you point out, he's kept on saying, Russia, Russia, Russia. What he should be saying is China, China, China. And because of all these other things we just talked about, his inability to talk about his relationship with her, that is a real indication that he remains compromised by them. And therefore, as I said, he shouldn't be sitting on that committee.
Do you think he's going to face consequences for this?
I don't know. The Republicans are a minority in the House of Representatives, where basically everything is done by majority vote. So let's say until 2022, unless the Republicans take back the House, up until now, Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, is standing behind Swalwell 100%. So I guess the answer is no. But Republicans are making a big deal of this, as they should.
So let's talk about Dianne Feinstein. I think that also didn't get a lot of news coverage. Can you talk about that situation, about her and one of her deputies?
Yeah, one of her deputies, who's often called in the media a driver, but was performing substantial tasks for her beyond chauffeuring her around, is almost certainly a Ministry of State Security agent. Now, that driver has been relieved of his responsibilities, but obviously she sits on the number of sensitive Senate committees. So this indicates that basically the Communist Party of China has really targeted the Democratic Party in California, especially in Northern California.
Yeah.
And so this is an indication of another Democratic Party politician from Northern California who's been compromised by the Chinese state security apparatus.
And many Americans believe that even Joe Biden is compromised by the Chinese government. If you look at Hunter Biden, his situation with the Chinese Bank of China, right? There's Hunter Biden with Christopher Heinz. They made this fund, and Bank of China promised to give them. I thought it was 1.5, but there was a report that $2 billion. They're supposed to get $2 billion, and I mean, what do you think about this situation? It's just complete nonsense too.
Hunter Biden has not divested himself of his interest in Bohai Harvest.
Isn't he
RST,
supposed to?
Which is the private equity firm in Shanghai that's at the center of this controversy. Yeah, he should, and indeed he promised to do so, and he still hasn't. This was a sweetheart deal. That these types of deals are not arranged in the absence of corrupt motives. Clearly, you have Hunter Biden going on Air Force Two to China. Yeah. You have the arrangement of this shortly afterwards. There are reports unconfirmed, but reports that from the Chinese side, this was arranged by the Communist Party's United Front Work Department, which is a department that is meant to influence foreigners. The deal is not commercial. These deals don't happen in this way in the commercial world. China giving $1.5 billion to manage to some American, that's not a big deal. They got a lot of money, but if the guy's got fund management experience, that's explainable. Hunter Biden has no relevant experience, so this looks from the top to the bottom, from the get-go, this looks like a corrupt deal.
So does Chinese government actively seek out these so-called princes and princesses and give them money, not directly because they can't, right? But they have these foundations set up all over the place. If you look at all kinds of famous politicians that you know of, they always have these foundations, and somehow they get hundreds of millions of dollars. They do that, right? Chinese government do that. What do you think about this situation? Should we block this? Should we prevent this? What should we do?
Well, certainly there are a lot of deals like this. So the answer to your first question is yes, this is what they do. And yes, we should be blocking this because this shows, an ability to corrupt American politicians. And there's another thing about Hunter Biden that people don't talk about. I mean, right now, Hunter Biden's under 3 separate federal investigations. There's FBI, the IRS Criminal Division, and the U.S. Attorney's Office in Wilmington. And there's a money trail there, and we'll get to the bottom of that, I'm sort of sure. But if not the FBI, at least the IRS will get after him. The point here, though, is Hunter Biden was a troubled individual. If he engaged in compromising acts on Chinese soil, or maybe even elsewhere, China's Ministry of State Security will have video, audio recordings of all of this, and that we may not know about. Because although money leaves a trail, these types of compromising activities probably don't leave a trail, which means that China has leverage over Joe Biden, which means Beijing will use that leverage, and the American public may never know about it.
So what you're saying is, if Hunter gets in trouble, he can call, Joe Biden and say, "Hey, Dad, help me out here." Right?
Yes, and we know that Joe Biden has not been particularly truthful about his relationship with his son when it comes to business dealings, because Joe Biden has said he's never talked to his son about it. But there are a number of people who have witnessed such conversations.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about big tech. Big tech. Do you think they are also compromised by the Chinese government? We remember Google getting kicked out of China years ago, but now it seems like they're creeping back. I don't know that particular situation in detail, but I wanted to know your opinion about the big tech, their relationship with the Chinese government.
Big tech is compromised by China. And you mentioned Google. Google left the China search market in 2010. Mm-hmm. That was when Google had principles. But they left a lot of their other non-search businesses in China. And just to talk about one of them, which is of particular concern, and that is their research into artificial intelligence. Google has 3 AI arrangements in Beijing. They've got a partnership with Tsinghua University, mm-hmm. which is often called China's MIT. They've got another partnership with Peking University, that's China's Harvard, and they've got the standalone Google AI Center. And those are bleeding important technologies into China. Artificial intelligence is critical because people say, and there's probably very little exaggeration in this, that whoever dominates AI dominates the 21st century, because AI will give you the keys to the economy, economic development, also military, all the rest of it. So AI is absolutely essential, and Google is helping China develop its AI. Remember, China, Google will say, look, we're not cooperating with the Chinese military. But in effect, they are, because everyone knows that China has this doctrine of civil-military fusion, which means that the Chinese military has access to all the technology that it wants in China, whether they're military-linked companies or whether they're purely civilian partnerships with universities. So all this Google AI info can be pipelined, and certainly almost is being pipelined directly into the Chinese military.
Do you think Chinese government has such a power over them that they can pretty much say, probably for instance, to Google, hey, since YouTube is owned by Google and a lot of people are getting censored on YouTube, especially I think even about criticizing China, some YouTubers got warned about that. Do you think they have such a power over them that they say, hey, if you keep on just allowing this to happen, we might cut off your business here in the mainland?
They already cut off. YouTube's not available in China. I think two things. I think that first of all, China will threaten Google and YouTube, but I think for the most part, YouTube and Google, they're not going to do certain things because on their own, because they're intimidated by China. Mm-hmm. Academic Perry Link calls this the anaconda in the chandelier, and that the anaconda doesn't have to strike, but because you look up into the chandelier and you see it there, you don't do certain things, you don't say certain things. So I think that's really the dynamic there, that they are intimidated.
But do they have power over even the mainstream media? The mainstream media, some of articles that came out on the New York Times and certain publications, you see them criticize about the organ harvesting that's happening in China. And then it would be on the front page for a couple of days, and then it would just completely disappear.
Or never appear at all.
Exactly. And do you think there's some kind of correlation because they have some kind of power over these publications as well?
Yeah, it's the same what we just talked about, that publications censor themselves. In some cases, we're pretty sure that China has put a hard word on some of these publications. So, for instance, both the New York Times and Bloomberg did those stories about Xi Jinping's the wealth of Xi Jinping's relatives, but Bloomberg was intimidated. And China actually threatened them. Yeah. And ever since then, we're seeing pro-Beijing stories come one right after the other out of Bloomberg. Bloomberg denies that they've censored this, but everyone who has talked about it makes it very clear that Bloomberg has put a political word out that they are not going to do, quote-unquote, anti-China stories. Mm-hmm.
Does the United States government has any official position about China's organ harvesting?
No.
They don't. But they know what's going on there, right?
Yes.
Aren't they supposed to?
They should be saying something, but they're not.
That is really tragic. So do you think, what do you think America should do from here on out? Do you expect Biden administration to continue Trump administration's policy towards China? I think he rhetorically said that he will, but do you expect that?
In certain areas, I don't expect Biden to continue Trump policies. So, for instance, we know that President Trump took the U.S. out of the World Health Organization. Biden, on his first day, rejoined. Trump took the U.S. out of the Paris Accord on climate change. Biden, on his first day, rejoined. So these are things which we know that they've reversed policies of the Trump administration. Mm-hmm. What they'll do long term, we'll only know later on. But the point is, there are certain things that clearly are not continuation of Trump policies.
Is that the reason why Trump was probably the only prominent, politician to talk about our issue with China? I can say that nobody else talked about it among any prominent politician. And Trump was not a politician; he was a businessman talking about it. And if you have to give a letter grade to the Trump administration toward their policy towards China, what would you give and why?
I would have liked to have seen Trump do more than what he did. But what Trump did was he reversed 5 decades of engagement policy. And for that, he gets an A+. Okay. I think that in terms of other things, he could have gone further and faster. So I'm not so generous on other things, but this was really important. And I think that probably Trump was primed to do more things in a second term. Yeah. So this is really a tragedy for the U.S.
In retrospect, do you think he should have moved faster, right? Well, what kind of things? What kind of things?
Everything. The reason why I say this is because China's overwhelming the United States right now. It's overwhelming the FBI, local law enforcement, governments everywhere. And we don't have a handle on this. We can't manage it. So I think that until we have a sense that we can manage this relationship, we need to cut all these links. So I think we need to close the 4 Chinese consulates that remain. I think we need to strip that enormous embassy in Beijing just down to the ambassador, his secretary, his family, and a guard or two. I think we shouldn't be trading with China. We shouldn't be investing in China's markets. They shouldn't be investing in our markets. These are things that just on many levels are not in our interest. Why should we be enriching Chinese companies that are developing weapons that are going to be used to kill Americans in Beijing's view? This is absolutely horrific. We shouldn't be funding our own destruction. And just one other point that people don't talk about. China's been committing genocide. And we Americans, the United States is a party to the Genocide Convention of 1948, which requires signatories to, quote, prevent and punish, unquote, genocide. If China's committing genocide, we have an obligation to prevent and punish it. That doesn't include, for instance, investing in their markets or trading with them and buying their products. It means that we've got to stop this.
Yeah. I was talking with General Robert Spalding about this. He said that the intelligence community didn't see this coming at all. And he thinks all these Chinese companies that you were talking about, they should be kicked out of the SEC. Do you agree with this point?
Yeah, they should be kicked out of what? Kicked out of
security, from the stock market, pretty much.
Yes, they should. They should be. No Chinese company should be listed in the United States. No American company should be listed in China. No American should be permitted to acquire Chinese portfolio investments. This is just wrong.
Yeah. Did you see this coming? That Chinese is infiltrating. I mean, the intelligence community said that they didn't see this coming.
Of course. I mean, China's been telling us how they feel about the United States, and you had to be blind not to see it.
No.
So it's not like I was able to foresee things. It's just the U.S. intelligence community is marked by one major failure after another to see things. We'd be a lot better maybe if we jumped it all.
Do you expect Trump to run again for 2024?
You have to ask him. I don't do domestic politics.
Yeah, I know. But do you see any other hawkish, towards China, politicians other than Trump? Who are the prominent ones that you would point?
One of them was here today. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
Yeah. They banned him, right? China banned him.
Well, yes, they sanctioned him and his family. That's meaningless, of course. But what they were doing with those sanctions on Trump officials and their families is they're basically saying they don't care. They realize that doesn't matter for those individuals. What they're saying, though, is to the Biden team, if you take actions which are prejudicial to us, we will prevent you from lucrative financial arrangements once you leave your positions.
So are we supposed to be scared for the next 4 years about this?
Absolutely.
Trend?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.